Welcome to Nature and Health Speaks. This is the first fall online seminar of the Nature and Health Initiative at the University of Washington. My name is Josh Lawler, and with Star Berry, I help direct the Nature and Health Initiative at UW. Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge that University of Washington is on the lands of the Coast Salish peoples, the land that touches the shared waters of all tribes and bands within the Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. We have a responsibility to acknowledge our Indigenous connections, as well as the histories of dispossession and forced removal that have allowed for the growth of this and so many of our institutions. So Nature and Health is a collaboration of researchers and practitioners and policymakers who are all interested in better understanding the connections between time spent in nature and human health. And we're interested in taking that understanding and using it to build better programs and policies that both improve human health for all people and help protect nature. Today, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Dr. Holli-Anne Passmore. Dr. Passmore is an assistant professor of psychology at Concordia University in Edmonton, Alberta. She's the director of the Nature Meaning in Life Research Lab and editor of the International Journal of Wellbeing, science chair of the Spirituality and Meaning Division of the International Positive Psychology Association, and an invited academic with the Global Wellbeing Initiative, which is a partnership between the Gallup World Poll and the Wellbeing for Planet Earth Foundation. And with all that, apparently she still has time to do research and to teach. Her academic research articles and book chapters have been published in numerous peer-reviewed journals and publications and featured in various media outlets and podcasts. And she's passionate about her teaching and her research and the importance of our relationship with the greater than human world.
Hello, thank you so much for that wonderful invitation, and hello to everybody who joined. Thank you so much for joining, and thank you so much for the invitation. It's a real honor and a real privilege to be here today. Let's jump right in then. So yeah, thanks again for having me here. I really appreciate it. And of course, I think that everybody here likely knows already that our connection with nature and spending time in nature and affiliating with nature is so incredibly important to our well-being. And indeed, we have known this, and science has known this for a long time. And I really love this quote that I dug up. This was 1914. This is Dr. Arthur Thompson from the British Medical Association, who wrote that there are deeply rooted, well-established, and far-reaching relations between man and nature, which we cannot ignore without a loss. There would be less pathology of everyday life if we kept up our acquaintance. And I should stop a minute and say, this is being recorded, which is great. And if somebody wants the slides afterwards, I'm happy to share as well. So this aspect of, if we kept up our acquaintance, that's really the guts, so to speak, of my research. And what I want to talk about today is how we can keep up that acquaintance with nature. And of course, in evidence-based ways. Before I do that, though, I kind of just want to back up a little bit and give you a really brief overview. I'm sure that people are well aware of many different theories of why nature enhances our well-being, biophilia, and perceptual fluency account, etc. But this is a theory that a colleague and I, Andrew Howell and I, proposed and published, gosh, I'm getting old, quite a few years ago now. I guess that was 2014. It's called Eco-Existential Positive Psychology Framework. And this really grounds a lot of my work. So I wanted to just give a brief overview of this, because my work really combines positive psychology, or the science of well-being, along with existential psychology. And what we proposed was that by cultivating our biophilic tendencies, so the fact that we are just we evolved to be innately drawn to life and to respond to emotional intensity to it and to all of nature, that this can help address our existential anxieties. And if you're not familiar with existentialism, don't get hung up on the word anxieties. Really, these are just really existential issues. So issues just by virtue of being alive, by virtue of existing, that we all need to deal with. So let's just have a look at each of these and how they relate to nature really quickly, and then we'll dig into the data. So we know, for example, that the greater than human natural world indeed plays a very essential role in our forming our self-concept and our personality. And throughout our history as a species, we have defined the boundaries of our uniqueness, but in comparison to other animals, to nature. We know that nature is a very important part of a collective identity for many Indigenous people, for certainly in Scandinavian countries, and certainly, depending where you are in Canada, part of the Canadian collective identity. And numerous studies, several of which are mine, also show very clearly and from around the world that the degree to which we incorporate nature into our identity is, of course, positively correlated with well-being. We know that when we, and this is from research, but also from practical aspects, when we embed ourselves in nature and in a larger circle of life and existence, that helps us to really help deal with the fact that we're going to die, right? That we are immortal. And this is what Lifton called symbolic immortality, right? We're connected to something that will last long after we are gone. When we connect with nature, of course, just by virtue of connecting to a larger functioning system, that helps reduce our sense of isolation, right? And the other way it helps reduce our isolation is the fact that we know that when people are in nature, they are more pro-social. And of course, this is going to help improve our social relationships. This aspect of freedom in novels and in literature, this idea of linking, of representing freedom with nature is so common that there's actually a term for it, and it's called nature-inspired autonomy. And this is backed up by data. Of course, we know that when people are out in a natural versus a more built environment, that we just feel more authentic. We feel like we are more free to be ourselves because we don't have all those pressures of society on us. There's a huge relationship between nature, being in nature, connecting to nature, and meaning in life. Part of that, of course, is just the aspect of connectedness. Part of it is the aspect of spirituality. It is almost impossible. I've never actually found any measure of spirituality that does not include at least one item of nature. This is very closely linked. The other reason why this is important is because one aspect beyond connectedness of nature, of meaning in life, is an aspect of order, of coherence. And even in this time of climate crises, which is an entirely different talk, there's a sense of order and patterns in nature, right? The sun still rises in the east, it sets in the west. The tides still come and go. Buds still, do still bloom in the spring. So there's another link to how this connecting with nature adds to our meaning in life. And of course, we know there's tons of data. We're just simply happier when we're in contact with nature. So I always find it interesting that despite all this literature, and this was really a cross-disciplinary kind of review that we did when we proposed that theoretical framework, all that literature, all this data, realistically, by and large, psychology and therapists, maybe not the people here today, but certainly positive psych, in large part, tends to ignore nature as a really valid way of enhancing well-being. And there's a number of reasons why, and I wanted to touch on only a couple of them. One is this idea that nature is far away. Then in order to connect with nature, we have to get out of the city and we have to go to the mountains, which is a great thing to do, or the ocean or the lake or wherever you are. Or even just that we have to get out and we have to go to an urban park. that's a bit of a problem, because when we start doing that, we really narrowly define nature, because nature is nearby. Nature is all around us. I would bet, I can certainly see some people online who have plants in their office. I'm fortunate these are all within a block of my house, these photos. Right? Go to the grocery store. There's flowers there. There's vegetables, which are actually also nature. And this idea of nearby nature is really where the focus of my research lies. Now, another reason why we tend to, I think, in psychology, tend to overlook nature as a valid way of enhancing well-being is this increasing emphasis on spending more time in nature. I am in no way, shape, or form saying that this is not important. There's good data to support people who spend more time in nature indeed have higher levels of well-being. And certainly from University of Washington, people like Greg Bratman have contributed and some really amazing studies on this. What I am saying is that when we only focus on time in nature, and here's where all my data from my studies will show, we're missing a big chunk of this. And if we only promote time in nature, that's a lot of extra pressure for people who are already busy, right? You're asking then people to spend, okay, now you have to be well-being, now you've got to add more time to your day. There's only so many hours in the day. And so I see a problem with this emphasis on spending more time in nature. And you'll see the data here that we're going to dig into now for the rest of the talk, of why I'm so passionate about this. That nature as a pathway to well-being does not necessarily mean having to spend more time in wilderness areas, and it doesn't necessarily mean having to spend more time even in urban parks. And here's the data why. So I want to talk about some practical, evidence-based, nature-based well-being interventions, because of course that's kind of why you're here, right? That's what we titled this talk. So the first one I want to talk about is the Noticing Nature intervention. And this is a series of studies that I started running in 2017, I think, with the goal of establishing this particular intervention as a valid positive psych intervention, because it was kind of driving me nuts that there's all these positive meta-analyses and nobody ever includes nature. There's reasons for that. But so what is this NNI, the Noticing Nature intervention? It's pretty straightforward. It's notice how the everyday nature you encounter in your daily routine makes you feel. And I'm going to say that one more time. Notice how the everyday nature you encounter in your daily routine makes you feel. And that's really important, the daily routine, but also the part of makes you feel. As an editor and as a peer reviewer, and also when I get interviewed for different podcasts or media, I see people cite my research and cite this slightly wrong. It's more than just noticing nature. It's noticing how it makes you feel. And that's a real crux of this aspect of noticing how it makes you feel, noticing your emotions. So I've run 4 studies on this, the original one, and then I've replicated this 3 times. They're all published except for the last one, which is just in just finishing up, typing it up kind of thing. Hopefully should be submitted. Well, it will be submitted by the end of this year, so the next few months. So what do we do? So these first 3 studies were in Canada, replicated it in China, and then the 3rd study was quite a bit larger, with quite a large sample size, 794, Canada, the United States, and China. It's your basic pre-post study. We gave people pre-measures, where are you at regards to well-being. They do the intervention for 2 weeks. We measure where everybody's at the end of the 2 weeks. So what indeed did we actually measure? Well, we measured a bunch of stuff. We measured different aspects of well-being, but I'm focusing on these 3 because these are 3 that we measured in all of these studies. So first of all, not surprisingly, was positive and negative affect. Secondly, was this emotion of elevation. And elevation is a composite emotion. It is a lot more than just feeling elevated. Elevation also includes feeling profoundly touched, deeply appreciative, morally elevated, spiritually uplifted. And we measured what I call transcendent connectedness. So a big sense of connectedness, right? To other people, to nature, just to life in general. So that's what we measured. Again, notice how everyday nature you encountered in your daily routine makes you feel. So here's what we did in these 3 studies. We had 3 conditions in each 3 study. Obviously, the noticing nature intervention was in each one. In the first study, what I did was we had people take a photo when something in nature evoked an emotion and then write their emotions about it. And I'm going to go across-wise along the rows for each study. We compared that to notice how the human-built objects in your environment make you feel, take a photo, write about your emotions, upload that, and then we had just a regular business as usual control condition. In study 2, this is the one in China, I wanted to tweak it. I wanted to make sure this worked in a different population rather than just Canadians. And I wanted to get rid of the cell phones. So here people noticed how nature made them feel, but they just wrote about it and wrote about their emotions. Same with noticed built environments, how it made them feel, wrote about their emotions. And I beefed up the control condition here. So here we've got a bit of an active control condition. Write about your details of your day. In study 3, same NNI, noticing nature intervention, same details for the control, but rather than a built condition, because remember the overall goal of this series of studies was validating this as a positive psych intervention. So I picked the most commonly used and cited positive psych intervention, 3 good things. List 3 good things in your day, and I pitted that, so to speak, against the noticing nature intervention. So what did we find? We found some pretty good results, replicated again and again. In all 3 studies, when you looked at people who had noticed how nature made them feel, so engaged in the NNI, significantly higher levels of net positive affect, significantly higher levels of that composite emotion of elevation, wonder, uplifted, inspired, appreciated, and significantly higher levels of transcendent connectedness, feeling connected to all of life. And this was for both compared to the control condition and compared to 3 good things. So this noticing nature intervention is doing something better or different. It's adding more than what the 3 good things intervention does. And we'll come back to this net positive affect space, blank space there, in a minute. The real kicker, to me at any rate, was these great effects were not because people spent more time in nature. Indeed, people in the nature condition did not spend significantly more time in nature than did anybody else. They simply noticed it and noticed how it made them feel. And that's a really important finding, particularly for clinicians. Asking somebody to do something that isn't adding time to their day. I've said preliminary on this just because I want to quadruple. I've literally checked these 3 times already, but I want to quadruple check these stats before I publish them. But I did want to share them today. I did a mini meta-analysis on all these studies: transcendent connectedness, elevation, net positive affect, nice effect sizes, big file drawer. And that the file drawer is the number of studies that would have to have no effect in order to bring it 0. So there's very good evidence, so pretty solid evidence supporting this in well-being, the noticing nature intervention. When you look at the size of the effect sizes, the average size of a positive psych intervention, based on numbers of meta-analyses now, is between 0.2 and 0.6. And each of those green dots is an effect size from one of my studies or one of my samples. And you can see that they're right in the margin or on the high side of other kinds of positive psych interventions. except this one. While the noticing nature intervention was boosted positive affect more than doing nothing, and it boosted elevation and transcendent connectedness more than doing nothing and more than being in the three good things, didn't seem to be a significant difference between nature and the three good things. That's kind of not surprising, right? Three good things is meant to enhance your well-being, specifically your positive affect. And that's this stray one green dot down here, way over to the left. So when we get that kind of data, we don't just stop there. What we can do is something called a non-inferiority or an equivalence test. And the stats don't really matter right now, but what does matter is the fact that this is a statistical test to show that the noticing nature intervention is just as or more effective than the three good things, a positive psych intervention. Also ran a follow-up study, a 1-week follow-up study, and again, preliminary, just because I want to quadruple check before I publish this, even though I have done these 3 times already. At the end of a week, that's composite emotion of elevation was still significantly higher than in the three good things condition. And moreover, people a week later were 1.38 times more likely to keep continuing doing the noticing nature intervention compared to the three good things. This inherent appeal to nature is really important and is coming out in the data. I also quoted thousands, literally, of qualitative data of the emotions. And what very consistently found out was that positive emotions significantly more likely to be associated with nature, while negative emotions were significantly less likely to be associated with nature, and vice versa. Positive emotions significantly less likely to be associated with built environments, negative emotions significantly more likely to be associated with noticing your everyday built environment. What about winter though? All 3 of those first studies were run either the spring, the summer, early fall, where weather's pretty nice still, right? What about in the winter? Well, I ran a study testing that as well. So I tested the NNI in winter, and I did this in Edmonton where it gets quite cold. You know, it's not that uncommon to have 2 weeks of straight -30. We ended up with a pretty small sample size, and this is published, by the way. Ended up with a relatively small sample size. There were just some issues getting flyers out and stuff. So what I did instead was really focused on the qualitative data. So I'm going to deal with that first here. We did the same thing, noticing nature, notice how the everyday nature around you makes you feel compared to built, compared to doing nothing. There's a big difference here in the ratio of positive to negative emotions. Nature, 8 positive to every 1 negative, built 3 positive to every 1 negative. That's a big difference between how much nature is going to boost your well-being, how many positive emotions you're going to get out of that. And I do see a couple of things in the chat, which I'll get to at the end, and we can have a big discussion. Now, we didn't have a large enough sample size to do between group comparisons. So what we did was a paired t-test. So within the nature condition, within the built condition, within the control condition, we look at the differences between pre and post. There was no difference for people who listed 3 good things in their life every day. There was no difference for the people who didn't do anything. There was a significant difference for people who did the noticing nature intervention. Again, positive affect, elevation, transcendent connectedness, and big effect sizes here, as well as hope. And while hope has come out as a qualitative theme often, this was really the first study that I'm aware of where we measured hope quantitatively. So while yes, this definitely needs to be replicated with a larger sample size, very solid findings here. And again, this did not depend on time in nature. people in the noticing nature intervention condition were not spending more time in nature than anybody else. They simply noticed the nature around them and how it made them feel. So it does seem some pretty solid evidence here that the NNI is effective at boosting well-being all year round. When we look at the qualitative data, this is study 1, study 2, and study 4. Study 3 was the one in, we haven't analyzed that quite yet. These are the emotions that came out to be more likely associated with built environments. So there's a few good things in there. Well, I'm not sure if fashionable is a good thing, whatever, but safety, comfortable, there's a few good things, but most of these, annoyed, angry, confused, yearning, that's the kind of emotions that people were saying when they actually noticed how their built environments were making them feel. Compare that to these emotions. Across all 4 studies, these are the emotions that came that were significantly more likely that people are saying, here's what I noticed, here's what was evoked for me when I noticed nature: peace, hope, rejuvenated, happiness. Quite a difference in the group of emotions here. One thing as well that came out from all the studies, I always ask people at the end of the study, did you learn anything? And what consistently came out was people, for one, that it reaffirmed the importance of the natural world in their everyday life. So people would often write things that, and people in the built environment or the built condition as well, saying, yeah, this really made me realize I kind of forgot how important it was to notice nature, how important that was for my well-being. And the other about insights regarding nature being all around. This came out in all of the studies, but in particular in the winter, that people were saying, wow, this really is right out my front doorstep. This really is even in my house with plants. So there's 2 more practical, evidence-based, nature-based well-being, that's kind of a mouthful, goodness, well-being interventions that I've run. And then I really wanted to leave quite a bit of time here for questions and discussion. So 3 Good Things in Nature is a nature-based well-being intervention that was originally developed by Miles Richardson and David Sheffield from University of Derby in the United Kingdom. And I had the great fortune to work with them for a year when I was as a postdoc. And they adapted, here we are back to 3 good things, most common thing in positive psych. They adapted that to be 3 good things in nature. Every day for a week, notice and jot down 3 good things about the nature that you deal with every day, that you happen to see in your daily routine. And they've run several studies on this, showing that yes, it indeed boosts well-being. What I wanted to do was I wanted to compare this. Okay, how does this compare to 3 good things? The way I did for the noticing nature intervention, which is better, or which intervention boosts which aspect of well-being? Again, 3 good things in nature, significantly higher levels compared to the other positive psych intervention, 3 good things, higher levels of transcendent connectedness, higher levels of elevation. And again, this was important. These were not moderated by time in nature or nature connectedness. So it wasn't like people were spending more time in nature. It wasn't like the people that this was effective for were already super connected to nature. Didn't matter. And this is a study that is mostly written up, actually, again, should be out hopefully in the next few months. Again, I did what's called an equivalence or non-inferiority test. And for affect balance, so net positive affect, having more positive than negative emotions, and with satisfaction with life, it's in that equivalent range. It's showing that, yeah, it's just as good. It is on par with 3 good things for those aspects. So kind of replicated in a way the very similar results to the Noticing Nature intervention, that positive psych interventions are great at boosting well-being, the happiness aspect. They also, though, over and above, also add these aspects of elevation and transcendent connectedness. The last evidence-based intervention that I wanted to speak about was a study that we're actually currently running. We're getting a larger sample size. And this is a series of studies actually that I'm doing with Dr. Lumber, Ryan, Richard, oh, good, blah, blah, blah. Try that again. Ryan Lumber, sorry, Ryan, if you're listening, in the United Kingdom, and with Ryan Nemec in the United States. And of course, Ryan Nemec is the director of the VIA Character Strengths Institute. And we're running a series of studies merging character strengths with nature. And the first one that we have run, but we are doing a follow-up to get a bigger sample size, I call this character strengths in nature. So this was a week-long study, and it was basically look for examples, so find your top 5 signature strengths, right? Like, what are your character strengths? And when you have those, look for how those are displayed in a natural environment. So, for example, say that your character strength is perseverance. Well, maybe you see nature displaying that by the vines, being incredibly persevering in growing and through cracks in the sidewalk. Maybe one of your character strengths is fairness. Well, maybe we've had people, we've published quite a large database set of this. It's just in a revise and resubmit stage for publication, looking at qualitative data on this. And some of the things people were saying were, well, my character strength is fairness, and I see the sun and the weather as enacting fairness. It's the same for everybody in a certain location. From a quantitative point of view, again, we see this transcendent connectedness aspect, that when we do this, put yourself in nature, character strengths in nature, significantly higher levels of transcendent connectedness. Connected to people, connected to nature, but connected to all of life. So those are 3 practical nature-based well-being interventions that are definitely evidence-based. Certainly the one that has the most is the NNI, the Noticing Nature intervention. And again, that's about noticing how nature makes you feel, your emotions. There's 3 good things in nature. Note 3 good things in the nature that you see every day. And there's this new one that we're developing and just getting a bigger data set for, is find your character strengths in nature. For me, everyday nature is incredibly important. It was like 70, 80, probably more than that now, % of the world lives in urban areas. We don't always live, I mean, I'm very fortunate that I do, but not everybody lives close to an urban park. Many people, even in, a particular city, usually lower socioeconomic status, don't live near parks. It's the everyday nature. I always say it's like tree at the bus stop. That kind of nature that is so powerful that we need to pay attention to. Certainly wild, far away nature is important. And just as, I can't remember where this one on the left is from BC, and the one on the right is Mount Robson, obviously in the winter. Of course, wild, far away nature is important. We know this, data shows this, we know this intuitively. We know this from, if we don't connect to that, we know that we will fall prey to what Peter Kahn there has said so beautifully, this generational amnesia, really understanding what wild nature actually is. What I am saying is that nearby, everyday urban nature is also incredibly important and incredibly powerful and efficacious in boosting well-being. All of these findings, we're not adding time to people's day. It wasn't people going to the park. It was their everyday routine. So I would leave you with this quote before the discussion of notice a little bit of nature every day and how it makes you feel. It may indeed change your life. And indeed, I'm pretty sure it will change your life for the better.
I can read them to you basically.
Thanks.
First of all, thank you. That was fascinating. I love that. I'm going to read you two of the questions in there. I've got a couple myself, but I'm going to start out with two of these questions. One of them refers back to your slide 24, asking how much, and I think this was your noticing nature intervention, if I remember right, but how much did the participants in the study know about the study? That is, did the participants in the control condition know anything about the aim of the study?
Great question. Yeah, thank you for asking that. So in most of, probably all, actually, really all of my studies, including these noticing nature ones, how we advertise this to everybody is that this is a well-being intervention, and you are going to be assigned to an activity. Some people will be, you get, officially it's called as deception, but realistically, you just get really good at lying and making up stories as a researcher. But we told everybody this is a well-being intervention. So we take that out of the equation. Everybody thinks that. And then we say, some people are going to be assigned an activity right away. Some people are going to be assigned an activity at the end of 2 weeks, because we're studying how this affects the effects at different times. So the control people didn't know they were in the control condition until they finished answering the post measures.
Insights that came from your studying these interventions across countries and cultures?
Great question. Yeah, so we've run this in Canada and the US, not really a lot of difference there, not really a lot of difference across different parts of Canada. But in China, it was quite validating, frankly, how incredibly similar. I'm not sure I would have known if it wasn't all written in Chinese, that the data was from anywhere else. And I think that speaks really strongly to this inherent pull that nature has for us. It's certainly an aspect that needs more looking into. I'd very much like to have in the works, kind of fuzzy at the moment, but working on running these with some of my contacts in Japan, in the United Arab Emirates. That's a very different culture, very different kind of nature. So, yeah, so far it seems really quite similar.
A question about whether you have any tips for convincing patients to do therapy outdoors.
Yeah, and I see on that one, especially in the winter. I teach a nature and well-being class, and this is always things that people say, oh, I can't go out in the winter. And my first response is always, do you have a coat? Yeah, managed to get to school here. And there are, I mean, granted, I understand, but it gets really cold here in Edmonton. That is a hard one. A lot of this is, I'm hoping to be working with a researcher from Stanford, actually, and she was interviewing me for a book, but that's just coming out. But looking at winter mindsets and changing people's mindset about winter. And I think that one of the things, certainly, I'm not a clinician. My PhD is in psych science. All my interventions are very applied. I think one of the things is really about doing this briefly, right? This aspect of people do go outside in the winter, right? And I would probably start there, of notice the nature as you're going to your car, as you're driving along. I think those are really important. You're right. I think it's a lot harder sell to get people out in winter. I think that's a gradual process. One of the ways might, and this is just off the top of my head, might really be simply about noticing the nature around you in the winter. I think we get really bundled up and forget that there is a lot of nature there, all the footprints of different animals that you can see. is really quite surprising if you actually look for it.
You've ever done studies like this with children or with teens?
I have not, and I so want to do this. Sorry, I'm so not good at not being and getting excited about things. My goodness, I'm such a 2-year-old often about research. I haven't done this with children or teens, and it's something that I really want to do because I think we know that the biggest predictor of pro-environmental behavior is nature connectedness. And we know that the biggest way to get people connected to nature is to connect them when they're young. So if any of you here would like to collaborate, I think it'd be wonderful to do versions of this with children and teenagers, most definitely.
Whether all of your studies have focused on urban residents or whether you've tried anything with people living in more rural environments and whether you might expect a difference.
Well, we know that some data, global data, suggests that people are more connected, more highly connected to nature who live in rural environments. There's some that isn't quite so sure on that or quite so solid. Most of this research was done with people who live in cities. We just finished analyzing a 3-week intervention with people in Belgium and Luxembourg, and that we got a range of people from the city and from rural, still mostly urban though, and partly because that's also my area of focus.
Question about whether in these studies you tracked what types of nature people were interacting with and noticing.
Oh yeah, big time. Great question. Thank you for all this. This is wonderful. So for every one of the studies that I've done has in some way incorporated a daily diary thing. So all those thousands of photos that people sent in the first one, and then in the winter one, and then all of those descriptions. I do have students, it's literally thousands and thousands of these descriptions of nature or photos of nature. And so I do have some students working in the lab to go through and code those. That's something that's a longer term project. It was really interesting though, just looking at, most of these were really tree at the bus stop kind of stuff, right? A squirrel. Winter ones were often rabbit tracks. There's a lot of rabbits here. It really was everyday kinds of stuff. Sometimes it was spectacular things like a double rainbow suddenly. That doesn't occur necessarily every day. But yeah, great question. Was everyday kinds of stuff. Often it was plants in people's houses. But definitely that's something that as we need to analyze more.
Wondering whether you considered the differences between emotions from the mind versus feelings in the body. If there was any sort of indication of the pathway through which people were kind of either picking up their feelings or
So it looks like Sarah that you had that one. So I'll give a little bit of an explanation then, but I'd like for you to expand on that a little bit more would be great. One of the things I really noticed was, by and large, people are really not very good at describing emotions or noticing what their emotions are. So certainly while coding these, it was a lot of, whether I was doing it or doing in combination with a research assistant of, okay, you can't infer that they meant that emotion, right? Here's what they actually wrote. And again, those emotional words like from the slides, happy, joyful, hopeful, rejuvenated, those people were able to pick out certain emotions. Some people would give long paragraphs. It's like, wow, okay, there's not actually an emotion in there at all, but there's a lot of hints at them. So I'm wondering, Sarah, can you just elaborate a little bit more about when you say feelings in the body, emotions from the mind body?
Yeah, absolutely. First, so exciting. I like really enjoy hearing about your work, and I also come from the mindfulness side of things. So I bring people outside, and I use mindfulness as a way of teaching people attention to the present moment. And part of what I do, which I didn't make up, comes from mindfulness, is also paying attention to what's happening in your body and where it's happening in your body. So you're kind of directing your attention specifically to like, what does it feel like to breathe right now? And like right now, I'm speaking in front of Zoom, always makes me a little nervous. So like, I feel it, I feel my breath. I can feel it if I notice it in the top sort of like upper area. It's a lot higher. If I'm relaxed, I can feel it more in my belly. So for instance, when people are writing things like they're anxious, where are they anxious? Where do they feel anxious? And then they might notice, oh, I feel it in my belly. I feel tightness in my belly. They might even say tightness in my throat. My breathing is high. Whereas like when people use words like calm, what were they feeling in their bodies when they were calm? Could they feel their shoulders relaxing? And then I think you start getting to like really deep health benefits that you get from just like a couple minutes of noticing both where you are in the world, like, oh, I noticed this plant. I noticed my body, my breath, and my thoughts as I noticed this plant. And so we move away from the way we think about our experience to like a physical experience of the experience. Does that make sense?
Totally. That's fantastic. Sorry, I was writing notes down as you were speaking. Oh, I'm such a research dog. Somebody dubbed me that once because I literally start salivating when I hear good research ideas, and I'm doing that now. So I'm trying not to drool on camera. Oh, that was such that would be. I have not done that, and nobody has commented on that, and that is definitely on my list for the next time we run one of these studies, because I think that's an entirely different aspect. And I should stop talking because my head's going with all other kinds of ideas on this. Thank you so much for that, Sarah. That's great. Yes, we definitely
great.
All right. The next question is also kind of digging into the mechanism and what might be going on. And I'll read it to you. You're noticing nature's study focused on perceptions of one's emotional state. What are your thoughts about the moderating potential of one's sensory perception of nature? Could this pathway have an impact, considering many Japanese and Korean studies that have isolated the effects of singular sensory experiences in nature on physiology?
That's a powerful question, a lot packed into there. I'm having a look at this again. Moderating potential of one's sensory perception. So that's an interesting question, and I hope that I'm answering this correctly, or that I've got this in my head correctly. Please just interrupt if I'm off target here. There's certainly been a lot of Japanese and Korean studies looking at forest bathing. And I'm assuming that's Shinrin-yoku, and I'm assuming that's kind of what the studies that you're referring to are. And those have very much looked at the outcomes. Like, I think here we're looking at different outcomes. I'm looking at, from a positive science of well-being, the outcomes of well-being, meaning in life, transcendent connectedness, elevation. That's what I'm measuring, as opposed to those studies are measuring different outcomes or different ways of measuring well-being. They're measuring immune system activity, hormone production. So I don't think that this, I'm wondering if this would actually be a mediated pathway rather than a moderated pathway. I could probably think of both, right? That your immune system, or let's go reduce stress hormone production is reduced, and that's going to lead, so that's going to mediate the pathway towards greater levels of happiness and elevation. Could also look at it, could also look at it, I hadn't thought of this at all, as a moderator. So does how much of when people are self-reporting elevation and connectedness and happiness, etc. How does that depend on how much their stress hormone reduced? I haven't looked at that, and I think it's an interesting pathways to look at. I think in many ways those are two very related, and they're kind of parallel pathways of looking at well-being. I'm not sure if that really quite taps on to what you're asking. Just jump in, it's fine.
Okay, we can move to the next one, I guess.
There's a lot.
Yeah, there are a lot of questions. Let me see. What do you think about mindlessness? So rather than focusing and paying attention, what about just being exposed without focusing? And this kind of gets to the question I was going to ask you: how important is the actual reflecting bit? Because it seems to be like your studies, you kind of separated out the having nature be there and not having nature be there with your controls, or having the focus not be on nature. But what about that reflecting bit, which seemed to be in all of your treatments and your controls? How important is that reflection bit? And the question that I'm kind of co-opting, sorry, Mary, but the question is really about what about just the experiencing it and the mindlessness and not the reflecting?
Wow, you're really, these are great questions, really making me think. This is fantastic. That's why I love doing these having these discussions. They get all these different ideas. Yes, you're right. Part of this, part of my interventions are really about noticing, right? Being mindful. Look around you. We know John Zielinski, a colleague and friend of mine, has published, I guess it's a couple years old now, but a study where if you give people mindfulness instructions ahead of time before going a walk in nature, that is more effective at boosting certain aspects of connectedness and well-being. I think this aspect of mindlessness is really important. I think it's just, I actually signed my emails, be well, capital B, capital E, of just being. And I think that's a whole area that we really haven't explored in the nature area. So I don't have a great answer for you, just to say that I think that's incredibly important. And it's certainly, this is why actually in my positive psych class, I have a whole lecture on boredom, because it's so important. We don't know how to just be anymore, right? And gosh, that's a whole other area of research. And if anybody wants to collaborate on doing any of these new studies, please let me know. Oh, that's great. I'm just going to make a note here while you're reading the next question.
Okay. And the next question is, let's see. I'd like to hear more about the Hope Agency measure in one of your latest noticing nature interventions that you shared. Was this about hope in general? Do you think the noticing nature intervention would also apply to improving hope related to climate change, or for those struggling with eco-anxiety?
Right, great question, Serena. And Serena is actually a co-author on the second study that we did in China. And she's in my lab and I work with her, and I feel very blessed. She is a name to watch out for in the future. She is a really amazing thinker and researcher who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting in person yet. To answer your question, Serena, yeah, that was actually that was I can't remember the author, but that was could have been Schneider's. Anyhow, I can send it to you. But of Hope Agency, and it would be in the article as well. It's embarrassing that I can't remember what it was, but that was just general hope. That was had nothing to do with eco-anxiety or climate change. That was just general in hope.
Nature and Health Speaks talk is on October 25th, and you can find that on the Nature and Health website. Hopefully you'll join us again.